Hello again, I'm in Utterby, a small village situated some 4 miles north from the market town of Louth, and this is Utterby Halt, a former railway station with a rather strange reputation, but more about that a little later on. Utterby Halt was opened by the Great Northern Railway on the 11th of December 1905 as part of a new motor train service between Grimsby and Louth. It consisted of 2 low platforms with a small waiting room and the crossing keeper's house situated on the north side of the crossing. In 1948 the railways were nationalised, and this was the beginning of the end for many small branch lines. Utterby Halt was closed to passenger traffic on the 11th of September 1961, but remained open to freight trains for a few more years. However, the halt was demolished in December 1980, and as you can see, very little remains. I'm standing on what used to be the railway crossing. Let's go and have a look around. As you can see, still the remains of the old track. I'm on the south side of the crossing, and you can plainly see the old signal post. Now, I apologise for the wind. I hope you can hear what I'm saying. These are the old crossing gates. Now, I've seen some photos online taken around 15 years ago showing the North Gate crossing, still in reasonably good condition. That's now gone, and this one has almost rotted away. There's the old crossing keeper's cottage on the north side. But of course for many years now it's been a private residence. Now let's take a walk down the old track. Now the line once ran from Grimsby to Louth, a 14-mile section of track, but of course for many years now it's been a public bridleway. Now I don't know if you can walk the track all the way to Louth, which is a distance of some 4 miles, but I would imagine that in high summer a lot of it would get very overgrown. It's hard to imagine that steam engines used to thunder along here. Now apparently when I was still in my pram, my parents would take me to a small bridge to watch the trains go by. Now this was the early 1960s, so they would have been steam trains, and great clouds of steam would engulf the bridge as they went past. Now, I was far too young to remember, but I had a fascination with trains when I was a kid. But by then, steam locomotives had been decommissioned for several years. I think I mentioned earlier that the line closed in 1980 and the tracks were removed shortly afterwards, but this old signalling gantry still remains. The line opened in December 1905, and it's possibly been here since then. Now I mentioned earlier that Utterby Halt has a rather strange reputation. It's the scene of at least 2 tragedies and subsequent ghost stories. In his book Railway Ghosts, Barry Herbert mentions a strange event that happened to a Mr. and Mrs. Hewitt when their car stalled here on the old railway crossing. Mr. Hewitt tried without success to restart the car, and the couple began to feel frightened that they might be hit by a train. But before they could leave the car, a gust of wind hit the vehicle, shaking it violently, and there was a loud roaring sound, as if a train had gone straight through the car. When silence returned, Mr. Hewitt attempted to restart the engine, and to his amazement it started first time, and they instantly drove up the crossing and stopped on the other side. The Hewitts got out of their car and looked around. The rusty track of the crossing was a bed of tangled weeds, and the sturdy gates, paint flaking off the surface, were firmly closed against the railway.
Puzzled, they decided to go to the crossing keeper's cottage to ask for some possible explanation, but the place was locked up with no sign of habitation. Research by author Barry Herbert to find a possible explanation led to a news item in the Louth Standard concerning a tragedy at Utterby Halt.
On a foggy day in 1953, railwayman John Lancaster had just finished checking a length of track when he heard the sound of an approaching freight train. He stepped off the track to avoid it, straight into the path of the Cleethorpes to London Express.
The noise of the freight train coming from Louth had drowned the sound of the approaching train. As the driver stated later, he didn't see Mr. Lancaster until he was almost on top of him, so nothing could stop this fatal accident. A coroner's report stated that Mr. Lancaster had been killed instantly. So therefore it appears that the Hewitts had witnessed a ghostly reenactment of the dreadful accident that had cost a man his life. Since the terrible accident, there have been many reports over the years of a spectral, shadowy figure believed to be the ghost of the unfortunate railwayman, walking the lane where the old tracks used to be. And people living nearby have heard the clattering of a locomotive and the mournful sound of a steam whistle on damp, foggy nights, usually around the anniversary of the fatal accident. But this is not the only haunting of Utterby Halt. In May 1910, 42-year-old Elizabeth Capes from Grimsby stepped carelessly from behind the carriage she had alighted and was struck and killed by a train. Her ghost, dressed in a long dark cloak, terrifies motorists by running across the road here on Pear Tree Lane.
Now there is another strange story attached to a signal box near the village of Claxby, some 16 miles from here. However, the signal box and indeed the station has long since been demolished, so nothing remains. However, we're in the perfect location to tell the story.
One night in 1968, signalman Aubrey Clark was working the night shift in Claxby's signal box. Shortly after 5 a.m, the next box along the line at Halton Moor contacted Claxby but received no reply. At length, the driver of the early morning tank train was forced to make an unscheduled stop at Claxby to see if everything was in order. On entering the signal box, he found Mr. Clark slumped in his armchair and obviously dead. The control office was informed of the tragedy, and a relief signalman was sent from Market Raisin to take over the operation of the signal box. The relief signalman wasted no time in getting rid of the armchair in which Aubrey Clark had died, and he replaced it with a new one. But he couldn't shake off the depressing atmosphere that now pervaded the tiny room. Then, one night, he heard the unmistakable sound of heavy breathing. Startled, he rose from his chair to look around, and the breathing stopped. But when he returned to the chair and sat down, the breathing started again. Then he realized the sound was coming from the corner of the room where Aubrey Clark had died. He resumed his duties, more puzzled than frightened, for he did not believe in ghosts. It wasn't long, however, before other signalmen working the box reported hearing the same sound of heavy breathing. And when the ghost of Aubrey Clark was seen one night climbing the stairs to the signal box, many refused to work there, so frightened were they of the strange events. Claxby signal box was closed in 1989 and demolished soon afterwards. but despite being locked and abandoned, Market Raisin Railway Station regularly received the 555 bell code from the deserted Claxby signal box. The bell code indicated that the signal box is operational. So it would appear that Aubrey Clark was so dedicated to his job that he diligently continues to man his post from the spirit world.
Well, thanks for joining me on my creepy little railway adventure.
Before I go, it's worth mentioning that the Lincolnshire Wolds Railway Group have plans to restore and reopen the line as a heritage railway. So possibly, in a not too distant future, steam engines will once again run through Utterby Halt. And if it's not too late, it would be nice to see the old signal restored and in working order again. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you'll join me again next time.